there! Ready for a wellness adventure? Let's explore the world of health together.
Ever wondered how your brain sends messages so fast? How you can feel the sting of a hot pan and pull your hand away in a split second? The secret lies in tiny chemical messengers called neurotransmitters. Today, we're diving deep into the world of neuroscience to understand what these crucial molecules are, and just as importantly, what they are not. Let's start with the basics. Imagine your nervous system is a massive, intricate network of highways. The cars on these highways are electrical signals. When a signal reaches the end of a neuron, it can't just jump to the next one. There's a tiny gap called a synapse. This is where neurotransmitters come in. They are the chemical couriers that carry the message across this gap, telling the next neuron whether to fire up or stay quiet. This process is the foundation for almost everything your brain does, from moving your muscles and feeling emotions to forming memories and even falling asleep. Now, you might be thinking, aren't hormones also chemical messengers? Yes, they are, but there are some key differences. Think of it this way. Neurotransmitters are like a direct private message sent from one person to another. They act super fast, we're talking milliseconds, and their effect is very localized, right there at the synapse. That's why your reflexes are so quick. Hormones, on the other hand, are more like a public broadcast announcement. They are released into the bloodstream by endocrine glands and travel all over the body. Their effects are much slower, taking minutes or even hours to unfold, and they influence any tissue that has the right receptors to listen in. So, neurotransmitters handle the rapid, moment-to-moment communication, while hormones manage long-term regulation, like your metabolism or stress response. For example, norepinephrine can act as a fast neurotransmitter in the brain, but when released by the adrenal glands into your blood, it acts as a slower hormone. The messenger's role depends on where it's released and how it travels. There's another player in this game, neuromodulators. While neurotransmitters directly cause a neuron to fire or not, neuromodulators are more like the volume knob for a conversation. They don't start the signal, but they can make a neuron more or less sensitive to other signals. They help tune the brain circuits, like when you're focusing intensely on a task. Neuromodulators help crank up the important signals and dial down the background noise. So, what does it take for a chemical to be called a neurotransmitter? Scientists have a strict checklist. It has to be made inside the neuron, stored in little sacs called vesicles, and released when an electrical signal arrives. Then it must bind to specific receptors on the next cell, and finally, have a way to be cleared out of the synapse so the signal doesn't just keep going forever. This cleanup is super important. The brain uses reuptake transporters to suck the neurotransmitters back up, or enzymes to break them down. Without this, our neural circuits would be in chaos. Neurotransmitters come in different types. There are amino acids like glutamate and GABA, which are the main go and stop signals in the brain. Then there are monoamines like dopamine and serotonin, which you've probably heard of. And there are also larger molecules called neuropeptides. Each type plays a unique role in the symphony of our brain function. This brings us to a huge misconception. Popular culture loves to label neurotransmitters as happy chemicals or stress chemicals. But this is a massive oversimplification. A neurotransmitter doesn't have an emotion attached to it. Its effect completely depends on where it's released in the brain, what kind of receptor it binds to, and the circuit it's a part of. Take dopamine, for instance. It's often called the pleasure chemical, but that's not quite right. National neuroscience research shows it's more about motivation, learning, and predicting rewards. It's a chemical that says, hey, pay attention, this is important for survival or satisfaction. It drives you to seek things out, whether it's food, a promotion, or just finishing a video game level. It's not the pleasure itself, but the drive to get it. The same goes for serotonin. It's not just the mood chemical. While it's definitely involved in regulating our mood, it also plays a role in sleep, appetite, and even digestion. That's why medications that affect serotonin can have such wide-ranging side effects. The complexity comes from the fact that there are many different types of serotonin receptors scattered all over the brain and body. The type of receptor a neurotransmitter binds to also changes its effect. Some receptors, called inotropic, open a channel and pause a very fast, direct response. Others, called metabotropic, trigger a slower, more complex chain reaction inside the cell. The same neurotransmitter can have different effects depending on which type of receptor it connects with, adding another layer of sophistication to brain signaling. It's crucial to remember that neurotransmitters don't act alone. They're part of vast, interconnected circuits. The brain is constantly working to maintain a delicate balance between go signals and stop signals. This balance, or homeostasis, is what keeps our neural activity stable and controlled. It's not about having more of one chemical, but about the right balance across the entire system. So, to wrap it all up, neurotransmitters are the brain's fast-acting, highly specific chemical messengers. They're different from the slower, broader-acting hormones. They aren't simple emotion buttons, but are complex signals whose meaning depends entirely on context, where they are, what they connect to, and what circuit they're in. Understanding this fundamental concept is the key to unlocking the mysteries of how our brain truly works. Ever feel like your brain is just a soup of chemicals? You hear about dopamine for pleasure, serotonin for mood, and norepinephrine for focus. It's a simple way to think about it, but the real story is so much more fascinating and, honestly, way more empowering. Today, we'll be going on a deep dive into the brain's communication network to understand how these chemical messengers really work. Stick around because what you learn might change how you think about your own mind. Let's start with a crucial idea. No neurotransmitter is an island. The brain isn't run by a few superstar chemicals controlling one thing each. Instead, it's a massive interconnected orchestra where different systems work together. According to leading neuroscience institutions, it's all about coordinated networks, not isolated chemicals. So let's meet the players, starting with perhaps the most famous one, dopamine. When you hear dopamine, you probably think reward, right? That's part of the story, but not the whole picture. Dopamine-producing neurons are nestled deep in the midbrain, sending out long branches to different areas. One set of pathways goes to the basal ganglia, which is crucial for movement. This is why the loss of these dopamine cells in Parkinson's disease leads to difficulty with motion. But what about that reward feeling? It's not just about pleasure. Dopamine is more like a learning signal. It fires up when an outcome is better than you expected and quiets down when it's worse. Think about it, if you study hard for a test and get an A, your dopamine system says, "Hey, that worked. Let's do it again." It strengthens the circuits that led to that success. It's a prediction system, constantly helping your brain adapt and learn from experience. It's what motivates you to chase your goals. Next up is serotonin. Often called the feel-good chemical, serotonin's role is incredibly broad. Its neurons start in the brainstem and spread out everywhere, influencing mood stability, sleep, appetite, and even how you control your impulses. When you pause for a second instead of snapping back in an argument, serotonin is part of that complex circuitry helping you regulate your response. While it's true that serotonin is involved in mood disorders, public health agencies are clear: mood is a network function. It's not as simple as having low serotonin. The effects of serotonin depend entirely on where in the brain it's acting and which of its many receptor types it's connecting with. It's not just a calm chemical, it's a master regulator. Now, let's talk about getting energized. That's where norepinephrine comes in. Also known as noradrenaline, this neurotransmitter is your brain's readiness system. Its neurons, originating in a tiny area called the locus coeruleus, project wildly to get your brain ready for action. Ever been in a noisy room and suddenly heard your name? That snap to attention is partly driven by norepinephrine. It helps filter out the noise and lock onto what's important. It boosts the signal. Too little can leave you feeling foggy and unfocused. Too much can tip you into anxiety. Like all these systems, balance is key, but that balance is dynamic, constantly shifting to meet the demands of your environment. Of course, all this signaling needs a basic on-off switch. The brain's main on switch is glutamate. It's the most abundant excitatory neurotransmitter, meaning it makes neurons more likely to fire. Glutamate is absolutely essential for fast communication, learning, and forming memories. The process of strengthening connections between neurons, which is how memories are stored, relies heavily on glutamate. Without it, information just wouldn't flow. But if everything was always on, our brains would be in chaos. That's why we have GABA, or gamma-aminobutyric acid. GABA is the primary off switch. It's an inhibitory neurotransmitter that calms neural activity. this isn't a bad thing, it's vital for stability. GABA prevents brain circuits from becoming overexcited, which could lead to seizures or just chaotic thinking. The delicate dance between glutamate ESCO signals and GABA stop signals is what allows for stable, controlled thought and action. Finally, there's acetylcholine. This neurotransmitter wears two major hats. In your body, it's the chemical that tells your muscles to contract. But in your brain, it's a key player in attention and memory. In fact, the degeneration of acetylcholine-producing neurons is linked to the memory problems seen in conditions like Alzheimer's disease. So we have all these systems, but what does balance truly mean? It's not about having equal amounts of each chemical. Balance is about coordinated regulation. When you're focused on a task, glutamate and acetylcholine might be firing in the brain regions you need for that work, while GABA is busy suppressing distracting signals from other areas. During rest, the pattern shifts completely. Balance is a dynamic state, not a fixed level. And these systems don't work in isolation. They constantly talk to each other. Dopamine activity can influence glutamate. Serotonin can adjust dopamine release. Norepinephrine can change how the whole cortex responds. It's a multi-layered system of checks and balances. Focusing on just one chemical at a time gives you a completely distorted picture. The way these neurotransmitters are released also matters. Sometimes they are released in a slow, steady trickle, which is called tonic firing. Other times they are released in quick, sharp bursts called phasic firing. That burst of dopamine you get from an unexpected reward is a phasic signal that screams, "Pay attention." This is important for learning. The same chemical can have different meanings depending on its timing. To make it even more complex, each neurotransmitter can bind to many different types of receptors, like a key that fits into several different locks. Serotonin, for instance, has over a dozen receptor subtypes. Activating one might excite a neuron, while activating another right next to it might inhibit it. Where these receptors are located is just as important as the chemical itself. These systems also change throughout our lives. During adolescence, for example, the dopamine reward system becomes highly sensitive. This helps explain why teenagers are often more drawn to novelty and risk-taking. It's not a flaw. It's a developmental phase designed to encourage exploration and independence. And, of course, our environment and lifestyle have a huge impact. Chronic stress can alter serotonin and norepinephrine pathways. A bad night's sleep can disrupt dopamine function. Exercise, on the other hand, can positively influence multiple systems. Your brain is constantly adapting to your life. This network perspective is also crucial for understanding how medications work. A drug that targets serotonin doesn't just increase serotonin levels. It changes the signaling dynamics across multiple brain circuits involved in mood, sleep, and anxiety. The therapeutic effect comes from that network-level change. So the next time you hear someone say they need a dopamine hit or are having a low serotonin day, you'll know the reality is far more intricate. Neurotransmitters don't dictate our feelings or personalities. They shape probabilities. They create biases in our brain circuits, making certain responses more or less likely in certain situations, but you are always more than your brain chemistry. Understanding this complex, dynamic network doesn't just give us a better picture of the brain. It gives us a better appreciation for the incredible adaptive system that makes us who we are. Ever wonder how a tiny pill can change your mood, or why that morning coffee makes you feel so alert? It's not magic. It's neuroscience. Our brains are a complex network of circuits, all communicating through chemical messengers called neurotransmitters. Today, we're diving deep into how medications and other substances hijack this system to change how we think, feel, and behave. First, let's get one thing straight. Most psychiatric and neurological drugs don't invent new signals in your brain. Instead, they act like a sound engineer at a concert, turning the volume up or down on existing conversations between your neurons. They do this by targeting key players, receptors, transporters, and enzymes. One of the most direct ways is by interacting with receptors, which are like tiny docking stations on your nerve cells. A substance that activates a receptor is called an agonist. It essentially mimics the brain's natural neurotransmitter. For example, some medications for movement disorders act as agonists for dopamine, boosting the signal to compensate for low natural levels. On the flip side, we have antagonists. These substances bind to a receptor but block it from activating. Imagine putting a key in a lock that fits but won't turn. It just sits there, preventing the correct key, the natural neurotransmitter, from working. This is how some antipsychotic medications work. They block specific dopamine receptors to calm down overactive circuits that can cause symptoms like hallucinations. Then there's a middle ground, partial agonist. These are fascinating because they can either increase or decrease signaling depending on the situation. They activate receptors, but only partially, producing a weaker signal than the natural neurotransmitter. If your brain's natural activity is low, they provide a gentle boost. If it's too high, they compete for the same receptors and bring the overall signal down. It's like having a built-in stabilizer for your neural circuits. Now, let's talk about cleanup. After a neurotransmitter sends its message, it doesn't just hang around. Special proteins called transporters act like tiny vacuums, pulling the neurotransmitter back into the original neuron for reuse. This process is called reuptake. Many common antidepressants are known as reuptake inhibitors. They work by blocking these transporters. By jamming the vacuum, they leave neurotransmitters like serotonin or norepinephrine in the synapse, the gap between neurons, for longer. This extends their signaling time, and over weeks, this prolonged modulation helps the brain's circuits gradually adapt and rebalance, which can lead to improved mood. Another crucial player is enzymes. These are proteins that break down neurotransmitters. Some medications, like monoamine oxidase inhibitors, work by blocking these enzymes. By slowing down the breakdown process, they increase the amount of available neurotransmitters. Because these enzymes often work on several different neurotransmitter systems at once, these types of medications need to be managed very carefully. Substances can also directly change how much neurotransmitter is released in the first place. Stimulant drugs, for instance, trigger a massive release of dopamine in the brain's reward pathways. This creates a powerful feeling of alertness and pleasure. However, public neuroscience research shows that repeatedly overstimulating these pathways can cause the brain to adapt in ways that are not always helpful. And this brings us to a key concept: adaptation. Your brain is constantly trying to maintain balance. If a receptor is bombarded with signals over and over, the cell might reduce the number of those receptors or make them less responsive. This is called downregulation. It's why someone might develop a tolerance to a substance, needing more to get the same effect. The opposite is also true. If a receptor isn't getting enough signal, the cell might create more receptors to catch whatever little signal it can. This is upregulation. These adaptations are crucial for understanding both treatment effects and the challenges of substance use. Timing is another critical piece of the puzzle. A drug might change your brain chemistry almost instantly, but you might not feel better for weeks. Why the delay? Because feeling better isn't just about topping up a chemical. It's about the brain slowly remodeling its connections, adjusting receptor levels, and changing the way entire networks operate. Clinical improvement is a result of circuit adaptation, not a quick chemical fix. Some substances don't even bother with the neurotransmitter itself and go straight for the electrical side of things. Certain sedatives, for example, enhance the effects of inhibitory signals by opening up channels that let chloride ions flow into a neuron, making it less likely to fire. On the other hand, some toxins can block the channels needed for neurons to fire at all, causing total paralysis. Let's look at some real-world examples. Alcohol is a great case study because it does so much. It enhances the brain's primary off signal, GABA, while simultaneously reducing its primary on signal, glutamate. This double whammy decreases overall brain activity. That's why a small amount can lower social inhibitions, but larger amounts impair coordination and judgment. With chronic use, the brain adapts to this constant suppression, and these changes are what contribute to withdrawal symptoms when the alcohol is removed. Nicotine in tobacco is another classic example. It acts on acetylcholine receptors, which in turn triggers a release of dopamine in reward pathways, reinforcing the habit. Over time, the brain changes the number of these receptors, altering its baseline state. This is why quitting can lead to intense cravings. In irritability, the brain is struggling to function without the substance it has adapted to. Even your daily coffee works this way. Caffeine's magic comes from blocking adenosine receptors. Adenosine is a chemical that naturally builds up in your brain throughout the day, making you feel sleepy. By blocking its receptors, caffeine prevents you from feeling tired, indirectly boosting alertness. This shows the substance doesn't need to look like a neurotransmitter. It just needs to interfere with the right part of the signaling machinery. It's vital to remember that medications don't create new thoughts or feelings. They modify the probability of signals being sent within your brain circuits. The final outcome, how you feel and act, depends on how your brain networks reorganize in response to these changes. This is why clinical guidelines often recommend combining medication with therapy. Your life experiences and behaviors also shape your brain circuits, and combining both approaches can lead to more powerful and lasting change. Of course, not all changes are for the better. Illicit substances can cause dopamine surges that are far more intense than any natural reward. This can hijack the brain's learning processes, causing it to prioritize drug-seeking cues above all else. This repeated overstimulation physically changes the connections in reward circuits, cementing cravings and compulsive behavior. And that brings us to withdrawal. When the brain has adapted to the constant presence of a substance, suddenly removing it throws the whole system out of whack. The receptors and transporters are all calibrated for a different chemical environment. It takes time for the brain to readjust back to its baseline, and that difficult transition period is what we call withdrawal. This is why doctors often recommend tapering off certain medications slowly to give the brain a chance to recalibrate more smoothly. Finally, specificity matters. Some drugs are highly targeted, affecting only one specific type of receptor. Others are more like a shotgun, affecting broad systems. More specific drugs often have fewer side effects, but because all brain circuits are interconnected, even a highly selective drug can have ripple effects on mood, sleep, or appetite. So, to wrap it all up, substances change our brain signaling by acting on receptors, transporters, and enzymes. They can mimic, block, prolong, or alter the release of our natural neurotransmitters. The effects we experience are a combination of immediate chemical shifts and the brain's own long-term adaptations. Understanding these incredible mechanisms helps us appreciate the complexity of the brain and the science behind modern treatments. Thanks for watching, and if you found this interesting, be sure to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the science of you.
Thanks for watching. Hope you liked it.